Welcome to Truth and Lies Radio, a program dedicated to revealing the truth and exposing the lies about the destruction of your freedom, and prosperity, and what you can do about it. And now, your host, former Washington right-wing activist, international living, banking and asset protection author and expert, and American patriot in exile, David Finzer.
This is David Finzer broadcasting for the next 2 hours from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad, along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia, on my 5,237th day of voluntary exile across 6 countries in protest from an ever less free America. To comment during the program while our studio is still being built, boy do I really hate contractors in August, you can send me a Skype text message at Truth and Lies Radio, all crammed together as one word, or you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. As soon as our new studio is finished, you'll also be able to call in toll-free from the U.S. and Canada, or Skype from around the world and join the conversation. Also remember to check out our Facebook and YouTube pages at Truth and Lies Radio Show. According to the big clock on truthandliesradio.com's FATCA/Taxmageddon Day countdown page, your taxes will skyrocket and your worldwide financial privacy will expire in 137 days, 13 hours, 51 minutes, and 1 second. Well, the big news, of course, is Julian Assange. We'll be talking about that in the second hour when my European co-host is on, but there's some other big news. Seems like Ecuador is, I guess, a little more friendly toward sheltering people than the United States is. Red China is filing treason charges against a defector who was turned away by the United States. Red China's communist government is preparing to file treason charges against a former official who sought political asylum at the U.S. consulate in Chengdu, but was turned away to avoid upsetting U.S.-Red Chinese relations, according to U.S. officials and Red Chinese propaganda organs. The former official, Wang Lijun, was a Chongqing police chief and deputy mayor until his visit to the U.S. consulate on February 6th, and he's expected to be charged with treason, a crime which under the Red Chinese communist system normally results in a single .22 caliber bullet in the back of the head, or at best life in prison at very hard labor. Wang made a dramatic escape from Chongqing in February wearing a disguise and spent the night at the U.S. consulate as just dozens and dozens of Chinese security police surrounded the consulate just like something out of the Boxer Rebellion. The U.S. officials said Wang had provided information and documents on the case of British national Neil Hayward, who was found dead in a Chongqing hotel the previous November. The Washington Free Beacon reported that the office of the ever-intelligent, Vice President Joe Biden was behind the administration to turn Wang away from the consulate, and in particular, Biden National Security Aide Antony Blinken was the one who gave all the reasons, obviously, because Biden can barely remember his name. Blinken, according to administration officials, overruled both State and Justice Department officials who favored granting Wang political asylum and working to get him out of China. Now, this is a man who had knowledge of a murder that has been in the British press, and the United States and Britain are supposed to have a special relationship. And it, certainly would not hurt to give this guy at least a hearing before he's thrown to the wolves. But the United States government is so busy, especially under this president, sucking up to the one of the most evil regimes still existing in the world today, and treating Red China like it is a legitimate country. Now I ask you, if a Gestapo senior official had gone to a consulate with information about the murder of a British national, would the United States, when it was a neutral power, have turned him away? I think not. I think that what's happened is the world, because they've become so dependent on Red China's cheap crap and on they're fearful of its growing financial power, much of which has been fueled by the United States. In fact, Red China only exists as Red China because the United States sold out Chiang Kai-shek and Free China, just like the United States has sold out so many of its allies. Only because of that, they decided to forget about the murder of Neil Haywood and to turn this guy back out into the streets where he will surely be killed. This is not justice. This is not what the U.S. stands for. This is just one more example of why I don't live there. Now, it's almost time to break for a commercial, and when we come back, we'll talk about some more rights that are ignored, and one more of the many reasons why I don't live in the United States, because of the imperial presidency. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio, telling the truth, exposing the lies. Don't go away. I'll be back in just a few minutes. Stay tuned. Well, we talked in the last segment about the probable outcome of a Red Chinese court. I think perhaps the outcome of an American court might be just a little different. Obama's Department of Justice is now demanding that a federal judge dismiss the injunction with which she sought to uphold the constitutional rights of the American people. On May 16th, federal judge Katherine Forrest granted a preliminary injunction to plaintiffs in a lawsuit filed against Barack Obama and the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, striking down those sections of the act that provide the president, or whoever is acting as president, the power to indefinitely detain American citizens without benefit of their Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights. Under the terms of the act, Mr. Obama was given the exclusive personal authority to direct members of the U.S. military to arrest and imprison anyone he believed to have substantially supported Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, or associated forces. When pressed by the attorney for the plaintiffs about the practical extent of this authority, the government lawyers admitted, quote, the NDAA does give the president the power to lock up people like journalist Chris Hedges and peaceful activists, end of quote, admitting that, quote, even war correspondents could be locked up indefinitely under the NDAA. Well, there you go. Now we've got a First Amendment violation, too, which guarantees freedom of the press. So now we got 3 instead of 2 we can argue about. And when asked by the judge what it meant to be an associated force, Obama's lawyers, again, this is a quote, claimed the right to refrain from offering any clear definition of the term or clear boundaries of the president's power under the law, unquote. In short, it's the federal government's plan that the act remains so vague that a corrupt and power-hungry regime will eventually be able to imprison virtually anyone it considers a threat to its pursuit of absolute power. On July 25th, the administration lawyers filed papers demanding Judge Forrest's preliminary injunction not be made permanent. In the filing, Obama made it clear his regime would ignore the court and its injunction regardless of what the judge may decide. Now that's despite his presidential oath to faithfully execute the laws of the United States. If the court gives an order not to enforce it, Mr. Obama then will be guilty of just one more high crime and misdemeanor, one more treason that ought to result in his impeachment, trial, conviction, and I want to be there for the hanging. But it goes on that they, in addition to ignoring it, regardless of what the judge says, they claim incorrectly that the injunction would have nil effect for the government because it would constitute to possess the identical detention authority under the 2001 authorization for use of military force. Of course, that's a lie, as the original law applies only to known members of Al-Qaeda or the Taliban, not anybody else that they can vaguely connect to it. One of the big indicators of the Obama regime's contempt for Judge Forrest, the law, and the American people was government attorney Benjamin Torrance's claim that it was, quote, the Obama administration's position, unquote, that NDAA detention provisions do not apply to American citizens living in the U.S. Judge Forrest responded by quoting Chief Justice Roberts, who wrote in a 2010 case that the Supreme Court, quote, would not uphold an unconstitutional statute merely because the government promised to use it reasonably, unquote. So much for Judge Forrest's faith in the validity and value of Obama's signed statement not to employ his Section 1021 authority to indefinitely detain the American public. They never pass a law they don't intend to use. If you believe Obama, then you obviously believe in the Easter Bunny, men from Mars, etc. Yet incredibly, when pressed on the issue, Obama's mouthpiece in court suggested to Forrest the concerns about the president's detention powers were excessive, as Americans would, after all, have the ability to file a writ of habeas corpus should they be illegal or improperly jailed. Well, of course, if they're denied right of counsel, that's going to be a little hard. There are very few people who would know how to do that pro se on their own. The judge answered, how long does such a petition take? When Torrance refused the answer, the judge responded for him, several years, right? It's pretty obvious what this is about. It is about the complete destruction of the Bill of Rights. It is about the surrendering of the powers of Congress and of the courts to the executive. As I keep on saying, this so closely parallels the fall of the Roman Republic that it becomes terrifying, more terrifying on a daily basis. The forms are being observed, but the substance is swept away. Obama wants to be the emperor. He's not satisfied with just being a king. He wants to be the emperor. He wants to be able to give thumbs up or thumbs down on every person in the United States merely on his say-so. Well, never let it be said that I am not an equal opportunity basher. I am neither a Republican nor a Democrat. I pick on Obama more probably because right now he is doing things to be picked on, but the Republicans are going to get their fair share. And Paul Ryan is a puzzle in many respects. And I'd like to quote something written by Mickey Booth, who is a Tea Party activist. And this is a long quote, but I think it's worth reading because it gives you an idea into the mind of this great conservative savior that Paul Ryan is held out to be. Quote, why would Tea Party favorites like Representative Ryan and Allen West vote for bills like the Patriot Act and the NDAA, leaving many of us scratching our heads and questioning their loyalty to the Constitution? I think I know the answer. I met Representative Paul Ryan when I was running for Congress at the time, challenging Blue Dog Democrat Dan Boren. It was during the last week of March 2010 in Oklahoma City. It took me several hours to get there, but for me it was worth the drive and the price of a $100 ticket. Ryan was the keynote speaker for the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs 2010 Citizenship Dinner. Ryan focused on the passage of Obamacare for most of his address, calling the bill a travesty, and said it was up to the people to start a new American revolution, but a peaceful one at the ballot box. He said, quote, "We need men and women who go to Congress that are running to stand up and fight for what this country is all about," unquote. Of course, I agreed with that and felt like it was me he was talking about. But I'd been disappointed only minutes before when I introduced myself to him and told him I was a Tea Party leader running against Dan Boren. He responded with, "Oh, he's a great guy. We're friends. You know, my wife is from Oklahoma. We have relatives there." Now, this is Finzer talking now. That's the quintessential Washington insider response. We're friends. He's a great guy. That's because Mr. Ryan has never had a real job. He's been in Washington since his early 20s. He is inside the system, and he protects his own. So he literally, virtually rather, spits in the face of this woman running against this liberal Democrat and just completely turns her off. The photographer snapped the souvenir photo, which we have shown you on the video cast, and Representative Ryan reached for the hand of the next person in line, essentially dismissing me. I'm back to quoting Mickey Booth. It wasn't what I had expected, or maybe more accurately what I had hoped for, but it was typical of how politicians don't listen to nobodies. But I wasn't a nobody to hundreds of people who knew me, or at least knew my record. I gained national recognition in the Tea Party movement when I held my husband's and son's birth certificates from Kapiolani Hospital in Hawaii and declared Obama's online forgery as, quote, a piece of junk. Long story short, I dropped out of the race and supported constitutional conservative Dr. Charles Thompson. Now, is that really the Ryan that is being fed to us by the press? A dedicated conservative who hates the left like God hates sin? One who says the enemy on the other side is his good friend and his wife's from Oklahoma, and makes light of the whole affair and just blows off this woman who is running for Congress for his own party, for the Tea Party movement. That's a big puzzle to me, but actually it's not a puzzle at all. He's an insider. Now when we come back, we'll take another view of this savior to the conservatives, Mr. Ryan. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio, and we're still talking about the enigma, the so-called conservative savior, Paul Ryan. When it comes to the issue that a president has the most power over, which is foreign policy, Ryan seems to believe in a virtually unlimited government, while somehow earning his reputation as some type of, quote, deficit hawk. Ryan firmly supports the Pentagon's corporate welfare programs. In his Path to Prosperity plan, Ryan calls for massive increases in the Pentagon's budget. According to the Daily Beast, Ryan has received briefings and immense praise from Elliott Abrams and Fred Kagan, two of the most well-known neocon holdovers from the Reagan and Bush administration. Now, let me explain a little bit about the neocons. They're neoconservatives is what they are, and they are not true conservatives. Traditional conservatives support limited constitutional government, free enterprise, a strong national defense, and traditional cultural values. They do not support an imperial America. And virtually every foreign policy mistake made in the Reagan administration can be laid at the feet of the neocons within his administration. We're all Bushites anyway, because they wanted America to be an imperial power, a great power. They wanted America to play world policeman. And America it was not such a bad thing then to ratchet up the Pentagon's budget, because that brought about the demise of the Soviet Union. Most people don't understand what caused the fall of the Soviet Union. The Hoover Institute years ago explained how to do it. They said ratchet up defense spending to the point that the American free enterprise system can still support it, but the Soviet socialist system will collapse. And that's exactly what happened. Reagan doubled defense spending because the United States defense spending was so much less an element of the GDP than Soviet defense spending. And when it got to the point where to keep up, the Soviets would have diverted 80% of their whole economy to defense spending to keep up with the United States, the Soviet Union fell apart, and in 1991 the wall came down and millions of people were free. Now that was a good thing, but getting involved in empire building is a bad thing, and that it needs to be laid firmly at the feet of the neocons like Bill Kristol, Elliot Abrams, all this whole gang, if you will, that are clearly part of will be part of any administration that Mr. Romney would put together if Mr. Ryan has anything to say about it. In a June 2011 foreign policy speech, Ryan criticized isolationism and argued that America, while propping up dictators and enforcing police states throughout the globe, is, quote, the greatest force for human freedom in the world. Well, it hasn't worked. How are we a force for human freedom in the world when day by day our freedom is being taken away? And this same hypocrite, Paul Ryan, voted for the NDAA and voted for the Patriot Act, which takes away our freedom. What are we doing? Are we outsourcing freedom to the world, just like we're outsourcing jobs, and America's going to be left with none, and there's going to be a new free power? That's the only thing it can possibly mean, because it doesn't fit in any other way. We put a regime in power in Afghanistan which immediately put in Sharia law, which hates us, which is killing American forces. Their own troops are killing American forces almost every day. We have fought a losing war to stabilize Iraq and engage in nation building. We violated the NATO charter when we invaded and attacked Serbia and Bosnia and Libya. We're talking about trying to start World War III with Iran and Syria. That's not what it's about. John Adams, second president of the United States, was right. America should be the friend of freedom throughout the world, but the guardian only of our own. And when America's strategic interests are at stake, America should react. That's why I'm not totally libertarian, because I believe in the use of force when it is morally appropriate. But Ryan, he goes way over the top. Ryan fits right in with the bipartisan foreign policy that has dominated Washington for decades and sees no problem with borrowing hundreds of billions of dollars a year in order to maintain or even expand America's crumbling empire. Ryan is no deficit hawk, he's just a hawk. He wants more war, debt, and government growth, but only in the military-industrial complex. Frankly, despite the abuse I've taken, I stand by my disdain for Paul Ryan as just another professional politician who has never had a real job in his life, whose whole life is centered around Washington, D.C., which we all know is a place, one geographical location surrounded on all four sides by reality. Now, what's really funny about this is Paul Ryan is now becoming much more important in the campaign against Obama than Mr. Romney. Leadership credibility isn't getting that much attention these days as we talk about Mitt Romney's vice presidential choice, but presidential elections at their core are contests between two contrasting visions of leadership for America. There's an old saying from the scriptures, where there is no vision, the people perish. Leadership's a major thing that gets people out to vote for you. added some inspiration, some likability, some fear, some game-changing ideas. It's what convinces people that the buck stops with you. Whatever the formula, however you present it, you need solid leadership credibility to gain confidence of the Americans who will show up on Election Day and get others to vote for you. Mitt Romney's leadership credibility was already low before last Saturday. The RNC is having him use the equivalent of applaud signs like on TV to get even the party faithful excited about him. Domestically, his likability ratings versus President Obama's were static, and Democrats' Bain capital and tax return offensives were working way too well. So when Romney announced Paul Ryan as his running mate, it was clear that Romney acknowledged he was running a leadership deficit and needed a game changer right away. Picking a deficit hawk and a super budget cutter, Ryan perhaps would solidify Romney's campaign commitment to fiscal responsibility. We'll talk a little bit more about fiscal responsibility, where we're going, when we come back in just a few minutes. Stay tuned. You know, the Romney campaign reminds me of the Roman god Janus, the two-faced god, because on Romney it wants to be all things to all men. He wants to attack Obamacare even though it was based on Romney Care. He was pro-abortion in Massachusetts. He's pro-life now. He's on all sides of all issues. And now what he's got is he's got someone to supposedly balance him out and take the heat for him. But my question is, where's the leadership in that? Where's the ownership? Picking a number two to do the heavy intellectual thinking, wasn't that tried with George W. Bush and Dick Cheney? It didn't work very well with them. Some are already calling the ticket Ryan Romney. And of course, Romney himself isn't helping. The fool actually called Ryan the next president. Is that a Freudian slip, perhaps? To make things even worse, in a 60 Minutes interview on Sunday, Romney stated that he's already presented his own budget plan and it will supersede Ryan's. So everyone's getting all worked up about Ryan's budget plan, and Romney's already said it's dead before it starts. The problem is that Romney has never been detailed to the extent that Ryan has, and Ryan's plans, being specific, will be getting most of the attention, even though it's all smoke and mirrors. He's a better magician than Romney is. He should work on the stage with doves coming out of hats, and he should pull rabbits out of his sleeves. The more Romney is vague about his plan compared to Ryan's, the more publicity attached he'll be to the measures that Ryan is indeed advocating. Now, one of the scariest stories that I came across today, because I am a strong believer in the right of the people to keep and bear arms, is a new attack on gun control, on gun ownership that's never been done before. Doctors now want to treat gun ownership like a social disease. Quote, "We live in a society saturated with guns and need better ways of preventing harm from them," says a doctor who believes the federal government must take a public health approach to gun ownership in the United States. Dr. Garen Wintemute, director of the University of California's Violence Prevention Research Program, well, that tells us which side he's on from the beginning, likens the dangers inherent to owning a gun to those involved in driving a car. Quote, "Highway safety measures, product changes, and driving laws slashed deaths from car crashes decades ago," says the doctor. "And just as it wasn't enough to curb highway deaths by trying to make people better drivers, it isn't enough to tackle gun violence by focusing on the people who are doing the shooting." He is so full of crap. He's more full of crap than a Christmas goose. There's a big difference between highway accidents and people doing the shooting. The one is deliberate, the other is not. In the one case, even the best defensive drivers may not have a way to get out of the way. If good citizens are armed, they have a clear way to solve these massacres by killing the bastards who commit them. But Rather, in the public health approach to treating gun violence, it must be understood that gun ownership itself is a precursor to that violence. So it's the gun that's evil. It's this, I guess, a new drug, some new evil drug or some witch's spell or something. It therefore becomes the role of science to forbid the sale of firearms to, quote, the wrong sort. That is, those most likely to engage in gun violence by determining who that wrong sort is likely to be. Now, of course, I believe that wrong sort is going to be anyone who opposes the government, who opposes taking away our guns. It's like when I applied for my gun permit in Uruguay. The psychiatrist that I had to go through the examination tried to trick me. She said, well, so why do you think you need a gun? And I looked at her and I said, I don't need a gun. I want a gun. And I explained why. But she was trying to trick me into thinking I needed a gun and I was sick. Also, according to health policy expert Daniel Webster, gun ownership, quote, can spread much like an infectious disease circulates. No, gun ownership in many respects is the way to solve the disease. When you have these absolute wackos floating around, the only way to take care of them, because the police can't be everywhere, even though they'd like to be, is with an armed citizenry. So rather than focus on the efforts of law enforcement on criminals or on gun training like Switzerland has for all of its citizens, these masters of societal improvement suggest that a properly caring government should control the purchase of guns by predetermining who the future criminals are likely to be. I think they saw that Tom Clancy movie where they were talking about future crime. To permit the American public to buy guns only when the time seems appropriate and allow only the purchase of those weapons considered safe enough to own, which I guess means BB guns and water pistols to these people. No doubt there are many more public health features which would make any concerns about self-defense quite unnecessary by scientifically guaranteeing that only the right people may own nothing but the safest of firearms, meaning those that have the little rubber plunger on the end and just stick against the plastic target. This is just one more insidious attack. It is the moral equivalent of the secondhand smoking myth. They have come up with some fake pseudoscience as a way to attack firearms. Now, if you're talking about people who are mentally unbalanced, if you're talking about people with delusions, how about someone with delusions of grandeur? And whenever I think of delusions of grandeur, of course, I turn to the man who sits in that expensive public housing on Pennsylvania Avenue, Mr. Obama. And as his campaign gets nasty in its attack against the Republican nominees, neither of whom I like, by the way, I don't like either side there, I thought it might be useful to remind people of the top 10 list of things that Obama has refused to release despite his promise of an open presidency. I had to stop at 10 because this is only a 2-hour show. Number 10, state Senate papers. They haven't been released. His academic transcripts haven't been released. His book proposal that with Obama's literary agent claiming he was born in Kenya for 16 years. His original book proposal exists. David Moranis refers to it, and it seems to have embellished other key details of his life, yet it's never been released. His medical records. In 2000 and again in 2008, GOP presidential candidate John McCain released thousands of pages of his medical records. Obama, who'd abused drugs and continued smoking, merely provided a one-page doctor's note, probably from a drunk medical somewhere. Small dollar donors. In 2008, the McCain campaign listed the names of donors who contributed less than $200, though it was not required to do so. Obama's campaign has completely refused, despite accusations it accepted illegal foreign contributions. The Khalidi tape. In 2003, Obama attended a party for his good friend, the radical Palestinian academic Rashid Khalidi. The event featured an incendiary anti-Israel rhetoric. The LA Times broke the story, but has refused to release the tape, and so has Obama. The real White House guest list. While touting its transparency, the Obama White House releases its guest logs, but has kept many visits secret and moved meetings with lobbyists off-site. It also refused to confirm the identities of visitors like Bertha Lewis of the infamous group Acorn, which is involved in massive voter fraud. Countless FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act. The Obama administration has been described as the worst ever in complying with Freedom of Information Act requests for documents. Health reform negotiations. When he was a candidate, Obama promised health care reform negotiations would be televised on C-SPAN. Instead, they were backroom only. And of course, last and not least, fast and furious documents. After months of stonewalling Congress, Attorney General Eric Holder got President Obama allegedly to use executive privilege, but it came from the Justice Department itself, to conceal thousands of documents related to the deadly scandal, and Obama did that. In addition to the above, Obama and his campaign have lied about many facts about his past, his membership in the New Party, his extensive connections with Acorn, and his continued relationship with domestic terrorist Bill Ayers and Jeremiah Wright, among other examples. Obama's own memoir is filled with more lies than Hitler's Mein Kampf. This man is a liar. He cannot prove that he should be president of the United States. He has produced a document, a birth certificate, that is patently false. I don't know why the American people continue to buy it. Well, now it's at the top of the hour, which means I'm going to go away for a while. But when we come back, it'll be Threatening Thursday, and I will have my guest, Oliver Neville, to talk about what's going on in Europe. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. This is David Finzer broadcasting for the second hour from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia. That's Serbia, not Siberia. I'm not that far away. On my 5,237th day of voluntary exile across 6 countries in protest from an ever less free America. To comment during the program while we're still waiting for the station to be finished, you can send me a Skype text message at Truth and Lies Radio, all one word, or you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com, or I suppose you can do as some of you have done very regularly, you can abuse me on Facebook. As soon as our new studio is finished, you'll also be able to call in toll-free from the U.S. and Canada or Skype and join the conversation. Our Facebook and YouTube pages are at Truth and Lies Radio Show. According to the U.S. debt clock, the total national debt is $15,972,711,000,000. That's a debt per citizen of $50,844, but a debt per taxpayer of $139,914. So you figure out the difference yourself. I'm not going to give you any clues this time. As always, the GDP is lagging way behind, which means if you confiscated all of the goods and services, the value of the goods and services produced in the United States throughout the whole year, you still couldn't pay off the damn debt. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is the real total U.S. debt is the incredibly huge $968,352,000,000, which means America is broke. I keep on saying this every day. It's broke, bankrupt, busted, and no one wants to admit it. Well, today's Threatening Thursday, which means that my co-host is the ever-popular Oliver Neville, who is joining us electronically from the United Kingdom. Hello, Ollie. How are you?
Hello, David. I'm very well. I've got no idea who you think I'm popular with, but it's very kind of you to say it.
I've met at least 2 people who like you.
That's more than I've met. So.
Okay, our top of the news. Assange is granted asylum. Ecuador has granted asylum to Wikileaks founder Julian Assange 2 months after he took refuge in its London embassy while fighting extradition from the UK. It was said there were fears Mr. Assange's human rights might be violated. So what's the rest of the story, Ollie?
Well, this is a very strange case, as Julian Assange usually is. He was on bail in the UK, pending to be extradited via the European arrest warrant to face rape charges in Sweden. And it's nuanced rape. It's not full out rape. It was that there was having sex without a condom unconsensually, while the sex itself was consensual. So it is nuanced.
So it's rape because of the lack of a condom.
Quite, yes. Sweden has different levels of rape, and he's on the very bottom one, the minimal. So he wasn't forcing victims to have sex with him. He just wasn't fully doing what they wanted to.
But if you call it rape, it makes it a lot bigger news than if you call it, something else.
Absolutely,
endangering the health of someone.
Absolutely. And so he went to the Ecuadorian embassy to get asylum, which has now been granted. But it's a very strange case because he's offered to be questioned by the Swedish authorities via video link. They haven't actually charged him with anything. They can't charge him until they've questioned him, and that's what they want to extradite him to do, to question him. But he's offered to be questioned via video link. They've refused. Ecuador said that they wouldn't grant him asylum, that they'd give him up if Sweden and America would confirm that he wouldn't be extradited from Sweden to America. Both of them have refused, so they won't say they won't do it. I mean, the case itself is very strange because the prosecutor initially dropped the charges. Assange left the country, then they took them up again. The British courts have not seen any prima facie evidence because it's the European arrest warrant, so all there needs to be is a warrant, and we have to give into it. That is the European Union.
Right, and as I understand it, under civil law, once the warrant's issued, you are detained while they're deciding whether or not to charge you, so you're imprisoned anyway.
Absolutely, yeah.
Before you're even charged with anything. You're not charged or arraigned as you would be in a common law court.
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't been charged. Yeah, he hasn't been charged. Now the UK is threatening to enter or de-recognise the embassy as an embassy, enter the embassy. William Hague, the Foreign Secretary, has recently said the UK does not accept the principle of diplomatic asylum. I mean, it seems like we might start charging into these embassies and trying to take them out. It's madness.
Well, this would not be the first time. Do you remember the UK admitted General Pinochet on a diplomatic visa and then jailed him anyway, ignoring the visa?
Absolutely.
So, the UK doesn't have a great record on this, but I bet they'll complain long and loud if one of their diplomats gets violated. Anyway, we'll continue this and other stories about who's to blame for what in a few minutes. We're back, and I'm here since it's threatening Thursday with my European co-host, Oliver Neville, and we've been talking about this strange case of Julian Assange and the European arrest warrant and a rape that isn't a rape, and it's a little bit confusing, but Ollie, who is one of the brightest and most interesting thinkers I think I've ever met, is going to untangle this web for us a little bit.
Well, David, some of the alleged crimes that Assange committed would have been crimes in the UK. Apparently, some wouldn't. I'm not. It seems to be, depending on who you talk to, he's either committed all have been committed crimes, or none of them are. So it's quite hard to get a definite idea of exactly whether what he's done is counts as rape in this country. Certainly in Sweden, what he's alleged to have done does count as rape or sexual assault. I think he's under one charge of molestation. There was some uncertainty if the victims themselves wanted him prosecuted, or if they just wanted him to take an HIV test to make sure that they weren't in trouble, and it seems to have been picked up by the Swedish prosecutors. So it is a bit of a jumble of things, but
well, prosecutors just love anything that's going to get them in the newspaper.
Oh yeah, I mean, this has been a big media. It has brought attention to the Swedish prosecutors themselves, and they've got the media attention. So, there is that angle. I mean, obviously, looming over the whole of this is the U.S., because lots of lawmakers in America have denounced him. Have said that they want him to be given the death penalty. You probably know more about that than I do. And obviously, you can see the treatment of Bradley Manning, which Assange is worried about. The thing is that now he's in the Ecuadorian embassy. Even if the UK doesn't storm it and try and take him out, he is trapped there because there are no ways for him to get to the airport and leave. Well, there are, the traditional ways, trying to be hidden in a diplomatic bag and stuff. Apparently, I've read that they won't fail. There is one proposed solution I read on the internet, which I thought was quite amusing. Ecuador could appoint Assange one of its representatives to the United Nations, which would be quite funny. When it does that, he then has diplomatic immunity completely, regardless of whether he's on diplomatic business or not, and he would be able to fly to America, as long as he's flying to the head of the UN, he can't be touched, and then fly home to Ecuador, and they couldn't touch him anywhere. So that would be one quite cheeky way for him potentially to escape, but what's probably going to happen is that he's just going to sit in the Ecuadorian embassy and wait.
Well, what's interesting is, way before you were born, for many years, the anti-communist leader of communist Hungary, Joseph Cardinal Mindszenty, was trapped inside the U.S. embassy in Budapest, and he refused to leave. And when he finally came out, when the Pope convinced him to finally come out after he had safely sent the crown of St. Stephen to the United States for safekeeping because it was the symbol of Hungarian freedom, the communist government allowed him to go because they did not want a diplomatic, because of the sanctity of diplomatic immunity and free movement to and from the embassies, etc. I mean, some years ago, they were even shooting in London from the Libyan embassy. I remember that. And there was still a diplomatic solution worked out. So my biggest fear is, even Hitler and Stalin recognized diplomatic immunity. Even the Red Chinese do it. Now, is Britain going to again violate diplomatic immunity like it did in the case of General Augusto Pinochet for the greater good? And then what happens when their diplomatic personnel get held? They're not going to have a leg to stand on.
No, it sets a horrific precedent if we do anything. It puts in danger our diplomats in Russia, in China, in North Korea. I mean, really, just to try and comply with the European Union's arrest warrant, European arrest warrant, to basically set a horrific precedent would be madness. I don't know what the UK thinks it's doing.
Well, the Geneva Convention on Diplomatic Personnel and Diplomatic Rights certainly trumps the EU.
Well, you'd hope, but I think the EU thinks it trumps everything.
Well, yeah, and the United States thinks it trumps everything too. So you have evil empires A and B going after this guy, and even if he is a criminal, even if he deserves to be in jail, the point is, right now he's within an embassy. He can be put under diplomatic immunity by another sovereign power, and really the most that the United Kingdom can legally do under the Geneva Convention is PNG the whole group, declare them all persona non grata, and let them leave peacefully. If they invade, then in fact the United Kingdom would in effect, under international law, be declaring war on the Republic of Ecuador, because that's Ecuadorian territory.
Yeah, I mean, apparently there was some legislation brought in after the Libyan shooting case, which you mentioned earlier, which allows the UK to de-recognise embassies as embassies, and so they're not actually, they become back the sovereign soil of Britain. How legit that is, I don't know.
Well, they can do that, but they still have to make them persona non grata and let them leave under the Geneva Convention.
It just seems a mess, and the whole thing is a big mess. And what it's really doing, it's attracting attention to Assange, who I'm sure might be a fan of the attention, but it is also attracting attention slightly to Wikileaks, and is further highlighting all the things it's released. So I think it's just hurting. If this is America trying to posture and get him for releasing all the documents, it just brings it up again, and it sort of highlight again. They get the feedback from everything they've done.
Well,
so,
the UK actually has the most to lose, because the UK has this dependent territory called the Falkland Islands, and Ecuador is a South American country. And do they really want the entire South American continent against them over something that's Sweden's problem, and Sweden and the United States are both being jackasses about?
Well, quite. It's now a problem for Ecuador and Sweden to fix at the moment. We shouldn't be alienating countries for no reason. He's not on our soil. He's not on our territory. We don't have to. That's us done. In my opinion.
Well, of course, it's always about the blame game, and I guess that moves us to our next subject about the rail fare rises and the government to blame. Bob Crow, the head of the Rail, Maritime and Transport Union, is calling on the government to nationalize the rail network in response to the prospect of a 6.2% rise in average rail fares next year. Some English fares will rise by RPI plus 3%, while in Scotland they will go up by RPI plus 1%. Wales has yet to set a figure for the increase, probably because those Welsh words are so long and it takes a while to get everything written. So what's this? Nationalization doesn't work.
Well, Bob Crow he is actually a communist. I mean, he's a communist earning something like £150,000 a year and living in subsidised by the taxpayer accommodation, but he is a communist. He says that he identifies more with Chinese labourers than British people.
So he likes slave labour.
He basically, any opportunity he does, he comes to throw out and say, nationalise this, nationalise that. But he's wrong. It's not a problem of the private operators that rail fares are rising. It's a problem of government. None of the private operators get any more profit from this fare rise. All fares by the franchise agreement, and this is something that the Department for Transport has confirmed, all fares, all profit goes to the government, because what Bob Crow has failed to realise is that the railways are already effectively nationalised. I mean, they are massive amount of government involvement. The government owns all the track, all the rail track. It sells routes to private providers, but that makes a local monopoly. It doesn't have there's no incentive for these private providers to invest, because they're only temporarily having the tracks. I mean, these guys, these supposed greedy private providers, they make 3 to 4 pence profit in the pound. The guys that are really making the money are the rolling stock operating companies. They're the ones that lease the vehicles to the train operating companies, and they're corporatist, because the government's created a tiny market. It's ridiculous. It's another corporatist failure. Okay, so it's corporatist welfare, but the left is trying to use it as an excuse to nationalize things. Absolutely. We'll be back. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio, and it's Threatening Thursday, so I have as my co-host Oliver Neville from the United Kingdom, who is our European co-host. During the commercial, I got an email from David in the United States
the message reads, I would like to be able to record your shows to play later and also to be able to convert to MP3 to put on my iPhone. Well, David, first of all, good name. We are working on that. My webmaster has been just released from hospital, and so we're trying to get those things set up so there will be a video archive on the Truth and Lies Radio website, and I will pass this on about converting to MP3 so that they'll work on iPhones. We're still in a building stage since we've gone our own way from the previous broadcast network we were on, but things are slowly but surely getting done. Unfortunately, like I said, it's been summer, and between contractors on holidays and people in hospital, things are slowing down. Now we're going to go into dangerous waters surrounding the Straits of Hormuz, or maybe the English Channel. I think Ollie and I agree on an awful lot of things, although he's rather a bit to my right. And these next couple of stories, we may find ourselves at opposite sides, but we will, of course, be gentlemen and perhaps agree to disagree. Anyway, Iranian oil. Stepped up efforts by the European Union and the United States, the two groups that think they should run the world, to hamper Iran's ability to export oil are moving into high gear. The sanctions offensive by Brussels and Washington has had a significant impact upon Tehran. Estimates vary, but analysts suggest that overall Iran's oil exports could have been reduced by up to 1 million barrels a day. That's some 40% down compared to average 2011 levels. Now, I don't very much like the Iranian theocracy, anti-Israeli, anti-Semitic regime there. I admit that's probably not, playing hardball as I pass it over to you, Ollie, but go ahead. I'm sure you can take it.
Well, this Iranian, you talk about it hurting Iran, the sanctions. These sanctions always hurt both sides. At the moment, Greece is being hurt because Iran was giving them special rates on their oil. Italy also was a heavy importer of Iranian oil, and so they're getting hit here. But also, by limiting the amount of oil that Iran can sell, you're actually encouraging Iran to raise oil prices. If if it's only selling a very small amount, it wants to sell them as much as possible. So how does it raise oil prices? If it causes a Middle Eastern incident, then oil prices shoot up, Iran makes more money. So you've got to think that there's always incentives everything you do. And this also goes further to isolate Iran. I know that lots of people might say that isolating Iran is a good thing, but when you isolate someone, you put them up against the wall, it caused a lot of problems, as I'll discuss when we go on to our next story with Iran and the nuclear weapons.
So your concern here is primarily economic?
Well, it's economic. I mean, it hurts everyone. I don't think that sanctions are the best way to deal with another regime. It turns the populace against America and the EU because it hurts them. That less money coming to the country hurts them. If they get into trouble, they're more likely to turn to the government to help them out. As soon as another country does something, it's very noted in the UK. If you can complain about the healthcare system as much as you want, as soon as an American attacks it, everyone defends it. And sanctions are like this, but on a much bigger scale. So you're pushing the populace away from them. You're sort of maybe even giving the government the moral high ground, and you're isolating it. And actually, by isolating Iran, you're encouraging it to build nuclear weapons.
Okay, well, I can understand that point of view. I, however, still remember, which you probably don't because of your age, the 444 days that American diplomats protected under the Geneva Convention were held in despicable captivity by this very regime, the same regime that's there. So I also think that sometimes by making things worse, they eventually start to blame the government. From what I understand, there's an awful lot of discontent with that government, and it's a theocracy that neither you, first of all, you and I would both be dead in that country. You've got to admit that, Ollie.
Yeah.
So, of all the people to feel sorry for, and all the people where I would disagree with you, I'm in favor of free trade with free nations, or at least nations that aren't completely tyrannical. And this is a tyrannical nation. There's plenty of other oil. I mean, the United States stupidly refused the Keystone pipeline from Canada. There are tens of thousands of oil wells that were capped in the United States. You may not know this. When oil prices dropped, 20 years ago, that the federal government will not let them uncap. Now, admittedly, they're not gushers, but they all pump oil. And the United States is playing this game, and Europe is playing this game, where on one hand they prevent the development of oil, which means we wouldn't need oil from places like Iran and some of these other countries, and so it's a very complicated issue. And I don't like the European Union or the U.S. government, but I think I dislike the Iranians more.
Well, going back to what you said about them holding U.S. diplomats, don't just look there. Look what caused that. Back in 1953, the U.S. overthrew the democratic leader of Iran, who was in favor of nationalizing their oil production, and put in the Shah, who was a dictator, who wasn't a nice person, didn't treat the Iranian people well. And when they overthrew him in 1979, he left, and America whipped him out of there. And there was anger with America. I'm not saying it's right what they did. I agree. They breached people's the diplomatic immunity of the diplomats, but they were demanding the Shah back. It's this great case of blowback.
Well,
we've been involved. Yeah.
I think what was done in '53 was no more wrong than overthrowing Salvador Allende. You had democratically elected, really, really bad guys that had the ability to cause a lot of problems, but we'll talk more about that when we come back. We've run out of time on this segment again. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. Don't go away. We'll be back with some more. Well, we're back for the last segment. I'm here with Oliver Neville, my European co-host, and we're actually talking about Asia. We've been talking about Iran. And there's a story about 4 men who've been arrested in Germany on suspicion of illegally supplying Iran with parts needed to build a nuclear reactor. Germany has an embargo on nuclear-related trade with Iran, as does most of the world. So, what's the story, Ollie?
Well, I just wanted to use this to further highlight the Iran issue that we were talking about before. I mean, obviously, these people have broken the law that is imposed there and are giving things to Iran. But the question is, why does Iran want why does Iran want nuclear weapons? Well, as we saw before with the oil, it's isolated. It's got basically no allies. It's left by itself. It's surrounded by U.S. military bases. Literally, in countries surrounding it, there are U.S. military bases. If you look on a map, it is just Iran with ... encircling it. It seemed what happened in Libya and in North Korea. In Libya, they were asked to decommission their nuclear program. They agreed, and then all of a sudden we went, we helped fund an uprising. We went in, we killed Gaddafi, we overthrew them. North Korea, building nuclear weapons. It's got lots of artillery pointed at South Korea, and we leave them alone. We do not. We do not ever start to try and fund uprisings there. So I think we're giving off very mixed messages to the world when someone does something we want, stops building nuclear weapons, and we attack them. People don't stop building nuclear weapons, and we sort of fear them and leave them alone. As I said before, I think there's a huge issue of blowback. The US has been involved in Iran since 1953, the UK much longer. The people still harbour resentment against the US for what it has historically done. In the 53, in the 80s when it supported Iraq, in the Iraq-Iran war, Clinton sanctions in '95, and all getting worse. We are pushing Iran, we are turning Iran into the state we don't want it to be by our sanctioning, by our surrounding it, by making it scared.
Well, I don't know how scared they are when the Russians are on their side. And, you know, one of the things that the counter-arguments was that the United States, by Jimmy Carter pulling the rug out from under the Shah, which is what he did, he destabilized the Middle East more than anyone, because the United States and the United Kingdom, NATO, had arranged a balance of power in the Middle East that included Iran, Turkey, and Israel against the Arab states, and that worked for a long time, and Jimmy Carter blew that. Now, I'm not convinced that democracies or polling figures are the best way to make foreign policy. That seems to be one of the ways that historically both your country and my country have failed tremendously. They don't make foreign policy based on good policy or on statesmanship. They make it based on pure political considerations that are dangerous for everyone. What I'm most concerned about, and you may be right that it's being backed too far, but I think regardless of whether we back them into a corner or open up complete diplomatic relations with them, I think they'll still try to nuke Israel, and Israel will flatten them, and we're going to face a world war anyway. So I sort of would rather them not have the nuclear weapons and not have extra money to do it. I mean,
these guys aren't. I don't think these guys are stupid. The people in charge. I mean, there might be some people there who are incredibly hardline in the sense that they would willingly die to destroy Israel, but most of them, the president, the Ayatollah, they have got themselves cushy positions. They are living a life of luxury. They can say platitudes, whatever they want. They can make comments saying that Israel is a unjustified, illegal, evil state, whatever, and keep the hardliners feeling happy. But these people are benefiting from the current system. It would be, they are not idiots. They would not throw their lives away on some crazy pursuit against Israel. They more want this nuclear weapon, it seems to me, as a defensive measure. One of the things that US and the UK do not understand is blowback. It was cited in the official 9/11 Commission as blowback is why we are getting these terrorist incidents, why we are getting so much trouble. We keep on involving ourselves in foreign wars, in foreign countries, messing with other people's affairs, which are incredibly complex, which we don't understand, and we really, really annoy them. And that's the best advertisement for Al-Qaeda is, seeing people dead from drone attacks, seeing, countries like Iran, push down the poverty that sanctions are causing. Every time we kill someone, we invade somewhere, Al-Qaeda thanks us because they get thousands and thousands of new recruits.
I think you're absolutely right about that. I still, though, cannot help remember the day that Ronald Reagan was sworn in as president, and they had a split screen. And as he took his hand off the Bible, the airliner carrying the American diplomats left Iranian airspace because they were afraid Ronald Reagan was going to turn around to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and say nuke them. And so, that in some ways meets your argument because they backed down then. I think they should be dealt with strength. If there's an opening, that's great. I mean, I don't know how much of what their crazy president says is for domestic consumption and how much he really believes in, but the hardline Islamists have really shown themselves to be willing to blow themselves up. So whether their leadership is or not, I don't know. But if we're going to get into these last two stories, we better move now.
Absolutely.
French riots. Buildings and cars were torched overnight as youths and police crashed in the northern French city of Amiens. 16 police officers were injured in clashes with about 100 youths who threw fireworks and large-sized shot and projectiles. At the same time, Racist attacks against immigrants are on the rise in Greece, leaving hundreds of victims injured and at least one dead. The head of an organization representing Pakistanis and Greeks in Greece said on Tuesday, Greece is a major gateway for mostly Asian and African migrants trying to enter the European Union. What about that? We're back to Europe now. We're in your part of the world.
Economic misery always sees the rise of the extremes. I mean, it's seen most certainly in the 1930s in Germany. And this just reminds me of something, to quote Nigel Farage, the head of UKIP, it's even more serious than economics, because if you rob people of their identity, if you rob them of their democracy, then all they're left with is nationalism and violence. And as the economy is collapsing, as Europe is, the EU is expanding itself, it's taking away Greek sovereignty. I mean, the French are obviously the next to get it. And as they do that, you are seeing exactly as you predicted. Greeks attacking immigrants, the French rioting because of these economic woes. It's happening more and more across Europe as people are, without any other options open to them, they're turning to violence, they're out on the streets, committing these crimes. It's scary. It's really scary.
Well, the EU is unquestionably an evil organization. I mean, for me, I remember when it was a lot easier. There were the good guys and the bad guys. Now I don't see very many good guys anywhere. And the EU has essentially colonized these southern European countries. I mean, they're being told what to do. They are forcing economic destruction. They're forcing this European project, which is destroying their economies, not allowing them to react to rebuild their economies. And when you see signs, I can't read Greek letters, but I can sure read neo-Nazi on these signs, and they are likely to turn to tyranny. Absolutely.
I mean, the EU is imposing leaders on places like Italy and Greece, overthrowing their democracy and putting in technocrats. You've got these people on the street, they're burning effigies of Angela Merkel, they're calling her a Nazi, they're comparing her to Hitler. They're really stoking up extreme nationalist tensions, and you're just causing the more likelihood of violence. Before, you'd say the bad effect of the EU was that it was hampering our economic prosperity and taking away a few of our civil liberties. Here, they're actually pushing people towards violence, towards hatred of other people in Europe. I mean, they could be setting the scene for another European civil war in the most extreme case.
And that's all we have time for. Thank you, Ollie. I'll see you tomorrow on Freaky Friday. To everybody, remember, you only have 3 choices. Give in and live like a serf, fight back until you can't stand it anymore, or get out and take your freedom with you. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio.